Another dramatic Premier League weekend, marred in controversy, claims of VAR failing once again, claims of refs being ridiculously inconsistent, and today we're going to go through it all. We'll kickstart with the Super Sunday late game, the Liverpool-Chelsea game, which also, because of some of the decisions, brought in the Arsenal and Bournemouth game as well. Let's start with probably the biggest or arguably most controversial decision, depending on who you ask, of the weekend that has been winding people up on social media, particularly the Arsenal fan base, is these red card incidents. Now, Reece, we'll come to you first. Comparisons aside, Saliba red card, are you satisfied that is the correct decision or not?
Absolutely. Saliba should know better. It's a poor thing to do. They're using it, Arsenal fans, as another excuse to mask why they're never going to win this title under this manager. Pathetic, poor, embarrassing. Another poor performance away from home against a team they should get something from. You know, we've had Newcastle, Fulham away, etc., etc. Another one that justifies why they'll never win this thing. Poor. Complete, blatant red card. I don't know what you're thinking.
I mean, on that topic as well, and I appreciate it's not the whole topic of this podcast, but there seems to be a lot of negativity from Arsenal fans at the moment at refs because of some of the red cards we've seen. From my side, though, when you analyse each of the decisions in isolation, I do feel like a lot of them have been the right decisions. So as much as we can criticise refs, and we certainly will in this episode, like, is it just maybe Arsenal losing their heads a little bit in those cases?
1,000%. It's 3 pathetic red cards they've given themselves. One for a last man, one for kicking the ball away, and another one for kicking the ball away. They know the rules. Have they just decided that they've never heard of the rule before? And what do all 3 of them red cards have in common? They've all led to drop points. Pathetic. There's no agenda against them. It's a pathetic mentality from a team that thinks it's better than what it actually is.
Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of drama as well with Howard Webb in the stands, I believe. That was also further winding some people up, let's say. But we'll leave that one for now. Jamie, ultimately with the Saliba one to start off with, you said at the time, straight away in real time, it was a red card. And you were surprised the ref didn't give it initially.
Yeah, my problem is the ref gave an initial yellow card. And I don't understand in any sort of rule that the referee should be looking at and trying to apply that that's a yellow card. He should be giving the correct decision and not go, oh, I'll let VAR overturn my decision. He should be giving his actual opinion on the decision and then going, okay, VAR's overturned it. Instead of a red, it is a yellow. It shouldn't be he's going, I'll give a yellow and let VAR look at it. And if they give the red, then we can blame VAR and I won't get as much criticism. So it's one that frustrated me because I said to you, I was in the pub with you, Jord, and I just went, that's a straight red. He's the last man, and people claiming that Ben White can catch up. That he's 12 yards away. I think it was 12 or 15 yards away. That's a hell of a lot to catch up. Doesn't mean he can't do it, but let's be honest, you're not putting Ben White as Usain Bolt trying to catch him up. It's a hell of a lot. It doesn't mean he's going to score the goal. It's the whole point is denying a goal scoring opportunity. And to be honest, Saliba, if he doesn't foul him, he probably keeps up with him and puts enough pressure on him for him to miss. So, but I do want to jump to Saliba's defence as well. 99% of defenders make that same foul. They all panic. They all will panic in that situation. So I don't blame him as a player, but it is still stupid when he could have got away with it and Arsenal could have had 11 men and it would have been a different game.
Yeah, I think ultimately as well, he's also in the half. We'll get onto the Chelsea one in a moment, but although it's frustrating again for Arsenal, like the Trossard one was frustrating, like the Rice one, I do feel like all of the anti-Arsenal ones have actually been the correct decisions by the letter of the law. It will feel frustrating for Arsenal, of course, but I think if we're being honest, that's how it feels from my side. Let's get on now, I guess, to the comparisons with the Chelsea game. There was a lot more arguably controversial decisions in the Liverpool-Chelsea game. I mean, I'll kickstart. Obviously, the one that's been doing the rounds on social media is the Tosin Yellow Card for Chelsea. I believe it was Jota he was pulling back. Very similar, at least in some fans' eyes, to the Saliba incident. Now, this, again, it's obviously infuriated a lot of people, but from my opinion, and obviously I'm biased, but if you view it and you watch it back again and again, there is so many differences with that versus the Saliba one. Ultimately, the comparison is obvious. Yes, it's the last defender with an attacker and he's slightly pulled him and he's fallen over. So I get the comparisons because it's in the same weekend. But if you watch it back, I mean, one, the actual contact starts in Liverpool's own half. The Saliba one was way more advanced, probably 10 or so meters ahead. Two, if you watch the Chelsea one, Colwill is literally side by side. So there's a bigger, much bigger argument that Levi Colwill was there with him. Whereas, as you said with Ben White, Jamie, it's just not recoverable distance. It's not. So I personally don't see the big drama with that. Do you guys disagree?
I do actually. The only thing that gives me the argument for it being a yellow is the flight of the ball. Because if you look at the Saliba one where Trossard's played it back, Evilson, or however you say his name, will be able to touch it and have it fully under control with that one touch. Jota, to control that down and have full control, has to be a very good touch while striding forward for it, so that he will have less of that control for a goal scoring opportunity. But I don't think it matters that it's in Liverpool's half that the contact started. He is the last man, and he's behind Jota. I think Tosin was lucky because that on another day could easily have been a red, I think. And you just couldn't have that much argument against it. Colwill, I don't think he was side by side, as you said, Jordan. I think he was, 3 to 5 yards back. Was a lot closer than Ben White, though. So I think them two things probably saved him. But I think if Liverpool didn't win that game, they would be kicking off, going, why has he not been sent off? And I think that's sort of one of them decisions where I think on another day you will see a red. So that's where you can criticise refs, is the consistency there. But it's very hard to put two things the exact same happening every time.
Yeah, I think I see both your points of view here. I do think it was a yellow card. I do agree that it seemed to start in his own half, and I do think that would have been a lot easier to cover than the Saliba one. But I also agree with you, Jamie, in the sense that could be a red card on another week. So I think he'd count himself quite fortunate, but I also think it's also fair. I know I'm contradicting myself a little bit, but this just goes to show how hard it is, isn't it, when you have to analyze everything. So yeah, I think a yellow card is fair, but yeah, I do think, again, does that next week, he probably gets a red.
And I guess that point kind of brings us on nicely to one of the big debates is what do we need to do for consistency in the Prem? Because as I said, I personally don't think those two incidents are as similar as everyone's making out. But let's say they are. Ultimately, there's two different decisions in a weekend for two similar fouls. Like, at what point, what can we change it? Because it is tough. And they've tried it with some of the handball rules. They've tried to change the rules to make it more black and white. But ultimately, it is football. It is subject to opinion, and it is human nature to see things slightly differently. So can this be improved, or do we just have to accept it as football fans?
I think it generally is it's a sitting on the fence answer, but it depends. There are some things that can be black and white, and there are some things that can't be. So that's the big issue you've got, because unless you go, if he's the last man, no matter where the other defender is, and he brings someone down, that's a red card. You could do that as black and white, but that doesn't tell the full story. it's difficult. You're always going to get human error as well. I know VAR's been brought in to try and correct that, but we've seen that doesn't always happen either. I think it's making the rules simpler will help refs, but everyone will complain about the refs. That is actually part of football. As fans, we all will moan about referees' decisions. Some will be absolutely minor, and some will be absolutely massive. Sort of like what this sort of turns out to be, sort of thing. So it's difficult, but I just don't see a way you can get perfect consistency unless you get robots, and even then, nothing happens the same every time. Like, you won't get two side-by-side cases that are the same.
Yeah, and it only works, doesn't it? The robotic technology, and we'll see how it works when it comes in with offsides, but it only works for black and white. It doesn't work for the subject nature of football, which is obviously what we're all going to get. And then if we make the rules black and white, as we saw with the handball rule, it's like if it touches your hand remotely, it's a foul. And then we see it in Europe, and then we go, bloody hell, it's ridiculous. So it is, to some degree, you can't win. But Reece, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I mean, it reverts back to my age-old comment of, we moan when they follow the book, we moan when they give leniency because they're not following the book. It's impossible. They're human beings. We're sitting here interpreting all these incidences here. We all interpreted the Tosin incident, for example, about how he had men to cover, he had this, he had that, Saliba didn't. It just goes to show. It just reminds me of your GCSE English when you're reading a book and, the poet says the curtains are blue. What does he mean? Does he mean that it's his state of despair? Does it mean, his brightness in love? Whatever. That's the interpretation you get. It's impossible to follow. It's impossible to get it right. We allow the abuse of referees because there's no consequences for the abuse of referees. It's unacceptable, the way the crowd and the managers behave. It's being allowed. It's like you're letting a pantomime villain, so to speak. There is realistically nothing you can do to improve it, because again, it's going to go back. If the robot follows the book to the T, that means the book is going to be followed to a T. Handball will be handball, etc., etc. So it's going to be so hard to justify it. What teams need to be focusing on is actually just putting the ball in the back of the net over 90 minutes, as far as I'm concerned. So,
yeah, it definitely does take attention away from other issues as well. Before we move on, just sticking with the Liverpool-Chelsea game, there's a few other decisions to discuss. And actually, I think a really interesting comment after the game from Maresca. So the Curtis Jones one, obviously, I did think at the time was a bit soft, more so because the Sancho one wasn't given. You guys said it's a foul. So let's touch on the Sancho one, because I'd argue that's probably the most controversial outside of the potential red card. From my perspective, and yes, again, Chelsea fan, so naturally I'm going to be claiming pens a bit more softly, let's say. But I don't get how the Sancho pen isn't given. And apparently it was reviewed. It was very quickly reviewed. If the Curtis Jones one's given, where he's not won the ball, he's made contact with the player, he's not absolutely wiped the player out, but he's made contact, so it's a pen. The Sancho one, you can see from the stills, you can see it in real time, doesn't get the ball, stamps on his foot. I don't get why that's not given and the other one is. So it comes back to this consistency issue.
Well, like you sort of touched on there, me and Reece both went, that's a penalty. Like we weren't, there wasn't any shadow of a doubt for that one. So I think the Liverpool penalty should be fine. There's not really much to talk on it. The Sancho one, it's sort of one of them where you claim it as soft for a penalty, but it's a foul, so therefore it's a penalty. That's where I think it is a penalty. It's sort of one of them where you go, he's not done a lot wrong, but he's, he has trod on his foot, and he hasn't won the ball. So therefore, to me, he's given. It's not like it's you can't have no contact. Don't get me wrong. Like there's going to be some contact, but this was a contact that would have stopped Sancho from turning and trying to get the ball. Doesn't mean he would have got it, but trying to get the ball at least. So for me, it was a penalty. But yeah, it's one of them where it's just like, I don't see how it's not given. But they always talk about this threshold line where it's got to be above that, which I think is a made up line anyway. Like we're saying, there's no right or wrong answer. Well, there is right and wrong answers, but it's like they're all subject to people's opinions. So that's where I'm a bit like, I don't want to hear about a threshold line. I want to know if it's a foul or not. I believe it is, so therefore it's a penalty. If it's a foul outside the box, it's a foul inside the box.
Yeah, and that ultimately is the problem, that you're just not going to see the same. You're just not going to see this consistency, even if it's soft. It's like it felt like one of them, to be honest, where if the ref gives it, there's absolutely 0% chance it gets overturned. But just why isn't it being overturned in the first place? And I guess the kind of point that's quite a good debate before we move on to the City one is Maresca made comments that sometimes referees give in to the crowd pressure. And there was a lot yesterday that the penalty actually did come slightly after a previous Liverpool claim. And I've seen it a lot, both for and against Chelsea over the years. I do think the human nature of refs, and look, Fergie was good at this for years. I do think there is an inherent, maybe subconscious at times, pressure on referees to give a decision in the favour of a certain team based on crowd pressure. Maresca kind of hinted at it yesterday, and there was a few instances where soft fouls were given with a bit of crowd pressure. Do you guys agree on this in general? And do you think it's an issue?
Yeah, it's human nature that you would feel pressure. You'd feel that pressure as you walk in, the intense atmosphere, the hostile game, the rivalry. You might be on top of your game, but you might have that incident where something does happen because everyone jumped out of their seat. Naturally, you're going to go, oh, I've missed something there. Yes. That's not a blame on the referee. If all of us in that position, we would all feel that pressure, like someone watching over your shoulder all the time. So that's natural to behave like that. That doesn't mean that you are biased or you're there to cheat. You're there to referee a game. Some referees can zone it out. Doesn't matter to them whatsoever. They don't care. But it is very hard to do that. Like, it's easier for a manager to not make a substitution when the crowd are calling for one. That's easier. But it's not that easy when you're trying to watch every aspect of the game and you're waiting to blow the whistle and then something happens straight over the other side. You're trying to catch up with all aspects of place, and naturally that is going to impact your decision making. That is not a criticism. That is a human nature. Maresca should be more concerned that his team conceded straight after scoring, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree with Reece on that. It's human nature. I don't think a ref's going, the crap. Like, they will have that sort of in the back of their mind, but I don't think it fully impacts the decision. It's like you're going to get shouted at by either, 2,000 away fans or 40 odd thousand home fans. It can impact you slightly on like 50-50 decisions at times, but I don't. It's not a way of being right. I'm going to give. The ref doesn't go into a game going, I'm going to give the home team a decision here. I'm going to give the away team no decisions. It's just not true in that fact. There is pressure, and sometimes in your mind, you're like, that might be a foul. That might be a foul. And then you're hearing such like animosity, people going, that's a foul kind of thing. It kind of then goes, you know what? I was like 75% sure. That pushes you to an 80% sure, and then you give it kind of thing. You will get some of that because it's impossible to zone it out. Like, unless you wear, earmuffs constantly and they fully on drown out crowd noises, you're not going to get that.
Yeah. And I think, you touched on it a little bit, so we'll get into it. We'll move on. So despite all the drama we've discussed, that was not the only VAR/refereeing drama of the weekend. The other big talking point was Man City's very, very late winner against Wolves. And there's 2 points to discuss. We can discuss the actual decision in itself, but also I do want to address Gary O'Neill's comments about it, in a not word for word, but essentially what he again hinted at was that the team who scores there is bias towards that team, i.e., there's a higher chance of that goal being given because it's Man City and they're expected to win, which I personally do think, again, it comes down to a bit of psychology. It's subconscious bias to give decisions and results in the favour of the team who are expected to win. So before we get onto that, Jamie, slightly biased, of course, but did the ref make the right decision to allow the goal to stand, and why?
If you don't think that goal should have stood, you either don't fully understand football, you're a Wolves fan, or an Arsenal fan, or even a Liverpool fan, who was in a title race. That is simply it. Because one, they're saying, you've seen the argument of, oh, Silva's offside. Right, one, he was offside when we took the corner because he was stood next to the keeper, but oh wait, it's a corner, can't be offside. Then when Stones heads it, you can see Silva ducking and a good at least a metre or two to the right of Sarr. So in my eyes, I just don't understand how anyone can think it is offside. Two, they're saying that the Silva bumped into the goalie. Now, if you think that bump is a foul, there will be a penalty or free kick for every single corner we have. Every corner, because if that was a bump that was a foul, there's a lot worse going on in the middle of the box. And it's just ridiculous that people think this should be disallowed. I don't mind that the lino put his flag up to disallow it in real time, because one, the lino doesn't have the best position to see and thinks Silva was in front of the keeper at one point to block him. So I don't have a problem with the on-field decision, but when you look at it on VAR, especially ones where you look at it straight at the goal or from behind the goal, it so obviously should be allowed. So I have nothing more to say on that, because you see the Mark Goldbridge sort of stuff, he's doing it for the clicks. If that wasn't City, I don't think he'd be in as much of a uproar and disgrace of what the decision he's making it out to be. He's doing it for the views. He knows, any footballing fan properly knows, that shouldn't be disallowed.
So you're on the fence then?
Yep, slightly.
I think to be honest, what's probably most surprising is the fact that they go to the screen and they don't rule out the goal. That's most surprising, because
they've overturned the decision.
Yeah, I guess technically.
Whenever they've gone to offside. No. So the lino put his flag up for offside.
Yeah, but I don't think he gave it. So I think technically that is overturning it.
Yeah. So he's overturning it. So it's normal that you go to VAR and you overturn it, don't you?
Sorry, I meant the other way around. I meant the ref. I thought the ref gave the goal, then the flag went up.
Yeah.
So then he's technically gone the other way. That's how I saw it. I don't know. Maybe that's not correct, but.
Well, no, I guess from the ref's point of view, he didn't have anything wrong with it. Then the lino does, and you normally go with your other official. So I think it's overturned the on-field decision of the lino. It's kind of the way I think I see it.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And I mean, ultimately, I do agree. I think I get why, and this kind of again touches on the point we just made. Is if a robot's reffing that, he goes into the keeper, and he's in an offside position. So it's like a robot would probably rule that goal out. But you just need any degree of common football knowledge or common sense to say, obviously, that just shouldn't be ruled out. So I think the correct decision ultimately was made. So maybe we shouldn't slate VAR. But yeah, it's just savage for Wolves. Like 95th minute winner. City were terrible. Wolves just can't catch a break. Reece, do you agree with this decision?
Yeah, of course. It was a great, clever piece of play from Bernardo Silva. That was clever. He's right. You can't be offside from a corner. Soon as Stones touches it, he ducks and moves. Everyone's saying about, is he impeding Sarr, blah, 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 blah. Sarr can't concentrate. Sarr should be looking at the bloody ball. Don't worry about Bernardo Silva. He's about 3 foot taller than Bernardo Silva. Get the ball. And Bernardo Silva moved brilliantly out of that way. These are the same pundits that are going, goalkeepers get too much protection. And then Moni's not being looked out for there. It was a clever bit of play, a clever set piece, lovely header from John Stones as well. That's gone and won him the game. So
I think if you want to also talk on this bump of Bernardo Silva, then do we want to look back at the Arsenal goal that Gabriel scored, where Martinelli clearly, turns his back to Ederson and then walks backwards into him? That seemed fine, and there was no outrage from Arsenal fans on that one. So I find it's the hypocrisy. I said to you two at the time when I watched it, I went, that could be a foul, but that'd be very, very soft. You don't get that. You can see them being given because he's actually, physically walked into him. But Bernardo Silva's one, I even think, like Reece said, if Sarr stood still and Bernardo Silva didn't move and he was in front of him, Sarr could still see over Bernardo Silva's head. There's no way he's impeding him in anything of his line of sight. It's a load of rubbish.
All right, look, before we wrap up, I think it's important as well we do discuss these Gary O'Neill comments, and I think it's a great debate to have in football in general. The big club bias. Because again, these decisions, you do tend to see it for the bigger sides. I've said it many times jokingly for probably sitting Arsenal in the last couple of years. You get these late goals, you get these little decisions, and it does feel like there is a bit of bias from referees or VAR typically to go. I know every club thinks they've got an agenda against their club, but like we've seen it over the years, time and time again, these decisions, particularly away, particularly at Anfield, Old Trafford back in the day, decisions do tend to go for these big clubs. Do you guys think the big club bias does exist and is a problem in football?
No. Is quite simply my answer. The reason why you mentioned these last minute goals that keep happening for City and Arsenal over the few years is because we're attacking 95% of the time. And if we need a goal, the defending team puts 11 men in the box and we go and put our 11 men in that box, or our 10 without the goalie. That's why there's the last minute goals, because we're going for it, and the smaller teams, without trying to be disrespectful, are not. They're sitting back trying to defend their point or their 3 points, for example. In terms of the decisions, I still haven't seen a game where I've gone, he was fully biased towards one team for the whole 90 minutes. You might see one decision where you're like, that's a disgrace, for example. That's one decision. It's not a whole 90 minutes. I just think people think there's a corruption against your team. Arsenal will say the same. City will say the same in certain aspects. Chelsea will say the same in certain aspects. I don't think there is one set of bias for the big clubs. No.
Reece?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's touching on some very dangerous territory a little bit. I agree, is the fact that a lot of the time the bigger or better sides are going to push and push and push because their mentality is different. Wolves have had a very poor mentality this season. Granted, yes, they've played the better sides this season in their 8 games or so, but they still have the ability to try and stop that. I think, Gary O'Neill's acting like he's never had a decision go in his favour. Let's make that clear. I don't think there is an unconscious bias. I think naturally you can be a bit like that. Like, you're going to listen to more what your boss says and you're going to dump the work on the intern, aren't you? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's how it works in every single job. Gary O'Neill probably has, the ball boys or the apprentices cleaning his boots. Do you know what I mean? But he'll still do everything his owner says. It's like a chain of, command and interaction. So the big boys, you naturally do feel that. But I don't think there is an element towards it. I think it's just the reason why they're the top 6 is because they get the results to be the top 6. And it's factors like that that get them those games. So just grow up, really, take it on the chin. Like, you lost from a clever set piece, just dust yourself off and go to the next game.
Just to add on to that point of Gary O'Neill getting decisions. I remember last season, Wolves beat City. Kuna, a very, very late tackle on one of our players, didn't get a second yellow, and you end up winning 2-1 and he scored. Things happen. You get your decisions and sometimes you don't. And it's just like, is that bias there? I don't think so. It's the wrong decision, for my opinion, but it's not bias. That's where I think he needs to be careful with what he actually says.
Swings and roundabouts. You get it, you don't. It's just unfortunate for him that every time he's played one of those sides this season, it's not worked for him.
Yeah, and ultimately it comes down to the same old point. You defend it for 95 minutes. Why can't you do it for 20 more seconds? That's not the ref's fault. That's your own. And on that note, that is all we got time for. As always, we've had our say. We want to hear from you. No matter who you support, let us know your thoughts on this weekend's activities below. But as always, like, comment, and subscribe. You know the drill.